Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.go.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources, all backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio.
Well, gudday, Mick. How are you going this week?
Mate, do you want another life update?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mate, these Norwegian 4x4s, I don't want to sound cocky, rude or arrogant, because I know this will burn me big time, but they're feeling really good. I'm almost going to push it to a 5x4 and rename the whole protocol the Hughes 5x4 protocol training program, high intensity work. It's a mouthful, but it's proven to get the best out of your training. Hughes 5x4s.
Well, you know that I've actually kept in touch with Professor Jan Helgerud.
Has he copyrighted it? Has he trademarked it?
Well, I was just wondering whether you'd like me to put it to him and see if he wants to rename it the Hughes 5x4.
No, we'll just keep that under wraps, mate. It's okay. No, it's feeling good. I'm feeling good with it. I'm getting to the point where after the fourth round of 4 minutes, I actually honestly feel like I could probably go another round of 4 minutes, but time always gets the better of me. So I cut it because by the time I cool down, it's 40 minutes. 10-minute warm up, get through my 4 rounds. I have my 5-minute cool down at the end. That's 40 minutes done. Good days, I got a little cheeky calf raise in me. Some other days, I'm just out the door, ready to go home. So no, it's good. I love it.
Very good. Well, it sounds like it's made quite an impact on you that episode. So I'm glad that you're doing it well. But what's on today? What have you did? Well, it's one of your episodes today. So I'm interested in what you got served up for us.
It is, and we probably just need to crack into it rather than banter too much about my 5x4 protocols, because this is a big one. It's a ripper. It's an absolute ripper, and it features one of your good mates from your Hawthorn days, Andrew Russell, Jack Russell, as his mates call him Jack Russell, and all his colleagues and friends and family know him as Jack Russell. But Andrew Russell, to those that may not have come across him before, he's a high performance manager, and he's played a significant role in making athletes elite. Yeah, he's got such a wonderful personality. He's vibrant. He's got just a great attitude to training, hard but smart, and just a great guy. Met him once, obviously, to have our chat, but you've worked with him in the past, so maybe you got a little bit more to throw our listeners.
I think your summary of him is really spot on. I just remember with the 5 or 6 years that I worked with Jack, there's just one word for the guy, and it's impressive. He's just impressive in all facets. And I think that, like, when I've already listened to some of his comments for this episode, and I think that the listeners will get a sense for this. And I think that your comments about how he really brings personality and personality qualities to getting the best out of people. And that's why he's been so successful in his career. So if people can learn a little bit from the 20 minutes of him chatting today, I think that, or if you don't learn anything from him, then maybe have a listen again.
Yeah, to give Jack a bit more of, a run-up. Like, for those that haven't, our overseas listeners, like, he's played a significant role. He's been featured in 600 AFL games here across Essendon, Port Adelaide, Hawthorn, and previously working at Carlton, and won 6 premierships with him in charge. It's pretty impressive run sheet there. And now he's moved into working with elite track and field athletes, and one in particular, Seth O'Donnell. He's an Australian 5,000 metre champion, and he has got a story to share, which I'm going to share with everyone at the end. It's 7 minutes long. It's a story about how breaking all the rules with our physio hats on, breaking all the rules led to such wonderful success. Like it knocked me off my seat when I heard some of the stuff they did in this preparation for the World Athletics and the World Champ events just recently this year. So yeah, it's a fascinating story. So it's a long one. So strap yourself in, because it probably will touch over 40 minutes and might even nudge into 50. But honestly, it's one of the greatest chats I've had with another human being ever before.
Well, I think that, the title of this episode is Risk versus Reward. And I think that it's for so many athletes, like it will come across their athletic career usually at some point where they've got to make a decision on whether I'm carrying an injury or I've got issues, and whether I push forward or whether I don't. And this is like, for those of us worked in high level elite performance sport, this is something that we pretty much do on a daily basis. These are the decisions, these are the things that we have to kind of think through. And Jack articulates it very well.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important one, like just wearing our physio hats. And I think as a whole, and hopefully I'm not offending too many of the physio community, but we are naturally a more conservative, risk-adverse profession.
Agreed.
And great things, great things don't really happen in a comfortable space, in a safe space. And athletes always tread the line of risk. And they are more often than not very, very well aware of risk. And they're happy to take risks if they know there's going to be some rewards at the end. Our sports science friends, our exercise physiology friends, our high performance managers who are listening, they certainly are a little bit more on the riskier side of things and happy to take a punt every now and again. So I think this is where I think a lot of physios hopefully will sort of learn something from it to probably get a little bit out of our comfort zone, but also to sharing some of Jack's wonderful expertise here. So this one's probably going to be an interesting one where I'm going to kind of layer the risk versus reward scenario with what we currently do know a little bit in research when it comes to risk management. It's often termed load management in sports circles and training programs. I want to sort of, I guess, balance out the chat there and talk about a couple of papers about load management and taking calculated risks with athletes, because that's kind of where we sit. And then I'm obviously going to tell, Jack's going to come in and I'm going to play probably 5 clips there of his experience and his take on it as well. So, so I'm going to front fill it about load management. So those that are unaware of the acute to chronic workload ratio, it's a simple calculation that really, I guess, gained popularity in the mid-2000s, 2015, 2016. Tim Gabbett, Dr. Tim Gabbett. I've had a great relationship with Tim over the years. I've sat down and talked about load management with him for one of our masterclasses for Learn.physio. Remarkable man, very smart, clever man, got two PhDs in sports science. Like, he's just a wealth of knowledge. And he kind of, with his experience working in rugby league circles, started to understand over a decade's worth of work, maybe even more, that injuries were occurring within his rugby league populations when there was a mismatch between their training processes. And what he coined after all his years of practice was a simple calculation where you can take your acute training load, divide it by your chronic training load, and you get a number at the end. So the acute training load really and usually refers to the last 7 days of your training. And how you get your load in a 7-day cycle can be done in many different ways. Sports science circles can get GPS data, they can get high-speed runs, D-cells, lots of different data. For us that are mere mortal and just work and live in a non-professional space, we can easily get an acute training data number based on the time we spent exercising times by the intensity of that exercise session. So for example, if we did a 60-minute session of running and we gave that 60-minute session a rating of perceived effort of 7 out of 10, we'll get a unit or a workload unit of 420 units, okay? And then you can then just add up what you do for a week, and that's what your acute training load is for a 7-day cycle. Now, to get a chronic training cycle, you do the same thing, but over a 4-week program. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense to you, Randall? Have I not confused everyone?
No. I think that's pretty good. Just to clarify, that 4-week period is immediately preceding that 1 week of acute training load. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. So the chronic training load. So we've got our 4 weeks of training prior to that, which we've added up our 4 weeks. Then we've got our acute training load on top of that. And once we get those 2 data sets, then we can get a number. Okay. And that number is kind of where we sit in today's talk about calculated risk, because we know from Tim's work there is a sweet spot. And this is what often gets coined and talked about in the literature. There is seemingly a sweet spot where the risk of injury, and when we talk about injury, we're talking about non-contact, mostly soft tissue injuries from the research. So think hamstring strains, think calf strains, think quad strains, so on and so forth. There is research in cricket fast bowlers as well with lumbar bone stress and that kind of stuff. And you can apply it in different contexts, but we're talking about mostly non-contact overuse injuries. So a score of 0.8 to 1.3 tends to be what's termed the sweet spot area, where our risk of injury, if we were to go out next week and play sport, would be at its lowest point. It still hovers around a 5 to 10% number, don't get us wrong. There's always risk when it comes to playing sport. If you don't want any risk, don't play. But there's always a low level risk that an injury can occur, even if you have your load right. Now, the funny thing about this curve is if your number is too low, so less than 0.8, it's actually got a higher risk of injury than this 0.8 to 1.3 figure. But what is clearly seen in the literature is when that number escapes past 1.5 and well beyond 2, the risk of injury in the future is really significant. And then comes a conversation, I think, that we all need to be appreciative of and it all comes down to context, is that if there is a risk, if there is a high level of acute to chronic workload, it shouldn't ever mean that it rubs a person out without a conversation, but it does give you a good conversation starting point to have with the athlete and the coach and the people around you. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of what the acute to chronic workload ratio is and some of the risk discussions that I guess is starting the conversation off today.
Yeah, I think that the point that doing too little can actually increase your chance of risk is an important one, just to maybe flesh out a little bit more, because, and you always see it in our game, don't you, where like people have an injury and then they have a cascade of injuries. You know, it's like, why did I got this really bad run of one thing happening after another? And a lot of it can be is that you'll have one injury that will take time out. You go back and you want to get back to where you were as quickly as possible, but that acute on chronic workload ratio goes way 1.3 or 1.5, and you get another one, and then the same thing happens again and you get another one. So I think that the underloading is just as important as the overloading, and I know that this will be discussed with your chat with Jack.
Yeah, it will. And to probably that Tim Gabbett talks about this quite a lot is the chronic rehabber. So the chronic rehabber, as you said, the person who does have an injury, gets underloaded and experiences a spike. And that's the thing, right? So a spike could be for someone that's got no workload in them. They've not been able to run, not been able to train, not been able to play for, let's say, 4 weeks, for example. So their chronic workload ratio is quite low compared to what the demands are of the game. And all of a sudden you go out on game day and blow your chronic workload ratio out by 3. That in itself. So if you're coming off a low base, it's risky. And obviously if you see these sort of big spikes, even if you're off a high base and then you spike and then you're off a low base, and any kind of big spike carries a risk. But it's often these chronic rehabbers and these chronic underloaders are seemingly a problem when it comes to future injury. The big one is, though, it's very rarely, if we do see a spike, it's not necessarily the next game they play, nor sometimes 2 weeks later, depending on the tissue that has mostly been stressed, will depend how it plays out. So soft tissues are more likely to go within 1 to 2 weeks after the spike. But bones may present a little bit later. So what we found, or what the researchers found in cricket fast bowlers, for example, was that it was up to 3 to 4 weeks post workload spike. So a test match bowler, for example, blows out their workload by, they do 50 overs over a test match series, which sort of doubles, if not triples, what they would normally be used for, that their bone stress often gets detected and their soreness often gets detected up to a month later. So I guess the take-home message here is if we have a spike, don't panic straight away. But also too, we need to also plan accordingly for sometimes up to a month after the spike to make sure we can get the athletes through. So that's a fascinating detail about this acute to chronic workload ratio.
It is fascinating. And I mean, it's for the physios who are listening out there. I think it's so easy to say, what have you done in the last week or the last 2 weeks? And then the athlete will kind of say to you, nothing, my training hasn't changed at all. But if you dig back further and you kind of go 3 or 4 weeks or 5 or 6, it's like, oh, I did. Yeah. Like I went away on a holiday or something like that. And I really got back into your training. It's like, there it is. You've got to make sure you cast your net wide enough.
Yep. All right, so I'm just going to dive into 3 papers in particular, 3 systematic reviews that have been looked at by a variety of different authors regarding the acute to chronic workload ratio and some of the risks involved. Now, the first paper is from a lead author called Andrade back in 2020, and it featured Tim Gabbett, Rod Whiteley from Aspetar, and Peter Blanche, who has been involved successfully with Brisbane Lions and was a co-author with Tim Gabbett's seminal paper back in 2016, Load Management, Training Hard, Training Smart Paradox. So a really key paper there. So massive research group that did a systematic review, looked at 20 longitudinal team sports, and it was all adult and elite professional teams. It was about 1,200 athletes. They collected about 2,300 injuries. The athletes involved in the study were mostly male, of the average age of about 24, and it was mostly soccer and AFL were the sports that dominate this paper. The key findings from this systematic review was that a higher acute to chronic workload ratio clearly carried a higher risk of injury in the preceding weeks, up to 4 weeks, versus a low to moderate acute to chronic workload ratio. And there was no study that found low risk of having a high acute to chronic workload ratio. So clear as day, if your acute to chronic workload ratio is beyond 1.5 and certainly above 2, there's a risk associated, a high risk. The other key finding was that low chronic ACE, so a low chronic fitness level, plus a high spike, showed the clearest risk escalation of future injury in this group of athletes. So the overriding message here was big spikes and a low training base are a problem. And importantly, a low fitness base was not at all, surprise, surprise, not shown to be protective. And that makes sense inherently. The demands on sport are so high. We can never, ever come close to replicating the demands of sport in training. We can come sometimes 80% of the way there in a lot of our training drills that we could do, but we can never replicate those demands unless we get the match intensity there, and you're playing for competition points, or you're playing for pride, or you're playing to get into the grand final, or whatever it is. Everything you do in a training environment is going to be sub-max, and if you're not training on a regular basis and getting that exposure, it inherently makes sense. So it often is counterintuitive to a lot of people to train actually hard, but we have to obviously train hard to get the best out of athletes to be able to then perform. So really interesting, well, not interesting, but I guess reassuring numbers there for us.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, paper 2. This one was another systematic review looking at elite athletes and non-contact injuries, 3 studies in particular in elite sport. Once again, spikes equal danger as the key take-home message here, where 2 studies in particular showed a 2 to 4.5 times greater risk of injury when acute to chronic workload ratios were high. And so when we talk about high acute to chronic workload ratios, once again, we're talking about 1.5 or above, with 2 being a really clear high jump. So that stays consistently. And the green zone, so our safer spot, our 0.8 to 1.3 acute to chronic workload ratio, is the safer territory when it comes to training. So it doesn't carry, once again, the findings were that it doesn't carry zero risk, but it carries a lower risk than if we're pushing the envelope on a consistent basis. And lastly, number 3 sits in line with what we've talked about already. This one was English Premier League football players, comprehensive 3-year study, a longitudinal study where they looked at acute to chronic workload ratios. With this study in particular, 2019 study by Bowen and colleagues, showed a 5 to 7 times greater risk of injury rates in Premier League football players. There were rapid spikes in their weekly training load according to the acute to chronic workload ratio, and even more so when their chronic load was low. So we've got 3 papers here singing off the same hymn sheet that try to avoid spikes if you're well trained, and try not to exceed 1.5 too often, and certainly try to limit your jumps above 2. But importantly, if you're coming off a low base through long-term injury, recurrent injuries of different, that's our thing. Like you have one injury that might be a separate injury from a different body part. Like you might be out of action for like a broken hand or a broken wrist or something like that, and all of a sudden now you go back and ping a calf. Like sometimes these injuries can be quite distinct from each other, but it affects your training. So if the person's coming off a low training base, they're the ones that we need to really watch out for, because they're the ones that will really rapidly jump up and spike their acute to chronic workload ratio. So that's what we have seen in the literature. What do you? You've worked in AFL previously, and you Winter Olympians, mate. What did you have anything to measure training load that you stuck to, or what was kind of your approach when it looked at managing workloads and risk?
Yeah, we looked at all that. And then at the time that I was at Hawthorn with Jack, I remember the first year I turned up, we'd all kind of arrived together, and one of the things Jack said to me, he goes, in football, the greatest predictor of anyone who's going to get injured during the season is if they don't complete the preseason. And I thought, that's really interesting. And this was just his own stats. And this was in the mid part of the noughties. And so interesting that, the research basically kind of demonstrated this alongside. And I've actually thought about it quite a bit myself over the last month or so, because as you know, and the listeners may know, I put a crack in my scapula a few months ago. So I'm about 2.5 months down the track from that now. And I feel good. Like I got full range of motion. My strength's probably 85%. I feel fairly normal. But I know that if I push my swimming and my training too hard too quickly, my scapula's going to be fine. That bone's all strong and healed up. But I'm just a Monty for a rotator cuff problem and or back pain or something that's going to keep me out as well. So as sad as I am about it, I just know that I've got another 3 months in front of me to actually kind of slowly build up my training and make sure I'm not going above that 1.3 off a low base.
Yep, agree. And I think this is where we also too, and I come across this clinical practice each and every day, and there are a lot of non-professional situations too where this will play out quite regularly. Think about the person that goes travelling overseas, someone that has a fairly sedentary job. They might tack off 5,000 steps a day if they're lucky, maybe even scape up to 8 to 10,000, and then all of a sudden they're out walking. They're out walking the streets of New York. They're off, traveling and gallivanting across the countryside in Europe, and all of a sudden now they've just thrown their daily step count out to 15,000 to 20,000 steps a day on average, and they wonder why they're getting sore. It's not the walking that's the problem, it's just the sheer volume. So I think little situations like this that I come across clinically also to apply in our more sedentary and less elite populations too. So I just want clinicians to sort of have a think about that, because as much as we're talking largely about elite and professional sports and physical activity, there are moments where you would sort of come across this in the clinic all the time that we could also to utilise the acute to chronic workload ratio. And the beauty of data, everyone's got a smartphone, everyone's got, wearable tech and all that kind of stuff to measure, some metrics. I think we could really dive into our histories with our patients and find an answer or two as to why they're presenting with a soreness of some type or another.
Gradual changes. I mean, it's so boring for us to keep saying this all day, every day, but it's just the evidence is there. It's so important for the body. The body doesn't respond well to acute changes in physical load.
Yep, agree. So just going to shift gears a little bit now. So I've painted the picture about risk and talked about the acute to chronic workload ratio. Now I'm just going to play a handful of clips here from Jack about what his experiences are taking risks, and some of the I guess the trade-offs and some of the things that he uses within his daily limits. So the first clip's about pushing to the wire and trying to reach the wire, which he's termed. So I'm just going to play this clip now. We can talk about it afterwards.
Then I think obviously you got to watch the athlete, and I think the element what's really important is watching how often the athlete goes to the wire or how often they fall apart. I think is really important. So if they fall apart a lot and they go to the wire a lot and they can't control their body when they're in a fatigue state, it tells you that something's going on. Either they psychologically can't deal with being stressed, or they're physically not prepared and they're going to the wire too much. And then, anytime they fall apart, whether it is physical or psychological, it doesn't actually matter. They're falling apart. So they can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And
exactly
so what is
right.
their capacity? Yep. What is their physical capacity? And what is their psychological capacity to handle whatever load you're throwing at them? And if you watch closely enough, they're going to give you that information. They're going to give you the information, and then you can actually ask the question and dive in and find out a bit more about them. So if they are going to the wire, then that's a real indicator, knowing their history. But I'm a big believer in testing their boundaries. I'm a big believer in that people can do far more than what they think they can do. I'm a big believer in their mind stops them before they're anywhere near their physical capabilities.
Yep.
But you also don't want to blow them up, because they will lose faith in themselves. Number one, they'll lose belief in themselves, and then they'll lose belief in you. So for me, and again, none of us do this perfectly, but for me, it's like, all right, learn a bit about them, learn a lot about them, watch them every day, and then start to push the needle to the right and say, all right, where can they go until they break? And being really comfortable that they do break and can break, and that's okay. Now, how they break and what they break is obviously really important to all of us, that you don't damage them in the long term. And so without risking their future, and so there's the short term and the long term, there's the breaking from a soft tissue point of view, and obviously there's a breaking from an overload point of view, bone, tendon.
So that was that's the first clip there, and I really like how he's quite comfortable. That last little bit too is, two things. That the last bit in particular was that he talked about, being comfortable with occasionally having a break here or there, because we don't know, often not, when we're trying to get the best out of athletes, where their red line is or where their wire is that is termed as well. So knowing where people, where their red line is, I think it's important that we can squeeze that little bit more. And once we know that, that's when we can sort of start playing with it and gradually build their ability to resist the wire or that red line over time. And I'm sure you've sort of experienced that firsthand yourself, mate.
With Jack, for sure. And the other thing I think that is really important is his comments as he speaks about that wire being psychological as well. And as much as we think about, physical injury, sometimes if you push people too hard and they push themselves too hard, then psychologically they can fall over the line and just lose interest, become demotivated, feel like this is not for me. And that's just as devastating to someone's athletic endeavours as what it is to ping a calf or a rotate a cuff.
Yep, exactly. The second part of our conversation was about, I asked him whether or not sports science may have gotten in the road a little bit over the years. There's lots of, I guess, pushback from what I've seen in the English Premier League, NBA, people rubbishing load management and people being held. So I just wanted to get his perspective and his, I guess, industry take on sports science and what its, I guess, role is to play in getting people to the wire and pushing the red line.
I think there's big teams of people. So there's lots of people with lots of views. It's hard to manage a lot of different views with these big teams of people. I think athletes are coming in worse, as in they're not as well prepared from the junior systems. Their football might be better, but their conditioning is poor. The pathway programs are poor in terms of adherence. They've got some great people, but it's literally, and I've had my son just go through a pathway program, and he could go on to play AFL without ever have done any strength work, because no one's making anyone accountable. Now, there's lots of athletes now going to do their own thing, but the athletes that are well prepared are pretty much doing their own thing. So I think the athlete is worse coming in. And then I also think what's happening now is because the coaches they want to do this decision-making based training. And I suppose I'm talking to AFL here a little bit, and my experience is they want to do a lot of decision-making based training. So within that, it sounds great in theory. And so Port Adelaide days, early days, 60 to 70% of our program was conditioning and 30% was ball work. Yep. Now, I was very lucky and we were fortunate. We had a very talented group of players on our hands, and that mix worked pretty well. And the game was also different. You know, there wasn't as much decision-making and pressing. And so a bit more natural talent was good for you. So, and the game's gone more serious. So what's ended up happening is that these coaches want to do more decision-making based training. So the way you build resilience is by doing the work. And so now athletes in AFL programs, a lot of the time, they're not finding out their limits, so they don't know where they are. They're not doing it together. That element of social comparison, that we've run up those hills together, we've done the work together, we've been here, we know it, we understand it, we have shared connection. Players can hide within the skills program, and as much as you've got GPS and you can say, oh, we'll tap them, you know, we'll top them up at the end for whatever values we want, it's not the same as when they're under duress, actually finding a way. And so the biggest thing for me is you're not training extremes. You're not training extremes of speed. You're not training extremes as repeatability, not training extremes of endurance. That's how you build resilience, self-confidence, mental toughness, whatever it is, the ability to deal with a very stressful event, which is fatigue, and work your way through it. I mean, and that is essentially my definition of mental toughness or resilience in any area, is whatever the stress that's coming at you, your ability to be able to deal with that and calm yourself down and work through that period of stress is essentially, and so you can relate that to training, you can relate that to dealing with a stressful event at work, you can deal with it in relationships, it doesn't matter what it is, having a calm mind to be able to deal with all the challenges that are coming at you. So I think there's been a real drip feed, effect that we're just getting more poorly conditioned. And spoken to quite a few people at AFL clubs, and I got sucked into this myself at Carlton, because at the end, when I left, I said Port was 70-30 conditioning the skills. At the end, my last year we were 87% ball program, 30% conditioning.
So a few little things there. So it doesn't seem like it's just the sports science crew that are to be blamed for maybe getting in the road of achieving the best results out of our athletes. Sometimes it's the coaches. The coaches sometimes have got a lot to blame, depending on what their strategy is to win games. And that last comment there about how decision making based games, where they're getting worst case scenarios on the field, those high pressure situations. It's good to sort of, I guess, experience that from an athlete, but in effect, we're probably not being able to get the most out of them physically. Yeah, so really interesting sort of nuggets there from Jack.
You can just sense his frustration that, without speaking out of turn here, like with the last couple of years with him being at Carlton, that he couldn't train and push the wire, as his language is, with his athletes enough for really them to kind of really get the most out of themselves physically. And I think that he gets frustrated by that. And I can understand that as well. And if you go back and, like you read any of the biographies from, the world's greatest athletes, I mean, Michael Jordan just comes out as the prime example of how hard those guys pushed themselves, how hard they had to train for greatness, and how close they were to the wire most of the time. That's where they get the rewards from it. So I can see why Jack's so frustrated at the moment. Yeah,
and it's hard, because you see these online debates, your people of that era. Jordan says he never wanted to miss a game. Charles Barkley comes out, Shaq come out. And a lot of sort of older NBA players, I use NBA as an example because load management is kind of like a hot topic. And, we got this era where some players are being rested at the back end of the year to preserve them so they could play in the finals. That was never done in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and probably the best part of the early 2000s, whereas now some teams are strategically resting players to sort of, get them through. Now, it's probably happening here in AFL land as well, but, before, I guess, sports science and inverted commas came around, players just played. If they had an 82-game season, they tried to play 82 games as much as they can. Yes, the games are faster, and there was going to be a lot of people sort of, throw their two cents worth at how the game's different to what it was, 20, 30 years ago. But a level of that certainly is that developing robustness and resilience through regular training and pushing them and trying to find their wire from time to time as well. That certainly plays a role. So, Yeah, really interesting perspectives there from Jack.
Yeah, and as you and Jack
Last little
both mentioned,
couple-
like if you don't tip over that line occasionally, you don't know where it is. So any good athlete that you meet will have injuries, will have issues, but they know where they sit. And I think that's one of the key takeaways and points that both you guys have made.
Yep. The next clip is an interesting one because I did ask Jack about, his experience training with Seth O'Donnell, the Australian 5,000K champion, and some of his other work that he's done in the past about some objective measures. And he gave me a long list of, things that he would do. But what I found really interesting, so quad strength, hamstring strength, all these kind of aerobic measures, all these really technical, objective, even blood tests. And even he talked about stool samples, trying to sort of get an idea of gut health. And, so he's collecting data like he's a mad scientist. But what I found fascinating was that the thing that he puts up on a shelf more than others is this. So just have a listen to this, what he's got to say.
So what we are looking at, though, in terms of what I do believe is really important, is some stuff around optimism. So we look at regular measures of optimism because you know how important that is to mental health. Are they optimistic and do they believe in the plan?
Yes.
We're also looking at a rating of connectedness. And if you look at self-determination theory, autonomy, connectedness, and competence. So the connectedness piece.
Yep.
Is he connected and does he believe in the people around him right now? So whoever they are, whoever matters in terms of driving his program.
Yep.
So that's the performance side of it. And then in his life, is he connected to people in his life? So, and does he feel supported with the people in his life? So those two factors there.
That was, for me, like really enlightening because we ask our athletes to fill out all these bits of data, questionnaires, subjective questionnaires, objective questionnaires. We collect mountains and mountains of data each and every day, GPS units, jump, hop, test numbers, the whole works and perks. Connectedness to a program, the relationships, like that's what he's finding to be two major determining factors of whether or not a person will thrive in the training program you're giving them. It's remarkable what he's found. I loved it. Loved hearing that.
And you can rest assured that Andrew Russell, when it comes to anything that comes to objective measure, trends in sport, that kind of thing, he trials it. So it's not like he's just kind of latched onto something and it's like, this is my thing. I remember back in the Hawthorn days, Andrew Lambert and I, who was the other physio, we went, after 2 years of being at the club, we went through all the different stuff that we had tried, all the different type of gadgets and measures, and we came up with a list of 65 different kind of things that we tried in 2 years to see whether they worked or not. Yeah. And this is all of it's kind of thrown at us by Jack, or like 80% of it anyway. So for him to kind of come back and just say, like, you've got to believe in the people around you, I think it's really powerful, and it makes sense. Like, like again, I talk about my swimming. If I believe that the sessions that the coach is putting up on the whiteboard every morning are going to help me swim faster, I will attack that session. I will go for it. I will really enjoy it. Whereas if I think that it's a bullshit session, I'm not into it, this is just a waste of my time, you just fluff your way through it. You don't get a lot out of it. And I think that's what Jack's saying here.
Yep, agree. Now, this is the story that just made me absolutely fall off my seat, and it's a long one. It's 7 minutes in length, so I urge you all to sort of sit and listen. I'm just going to press play and go for it. But this is a story about how breaking all the rules resulted in one of the most remarkable stories you'll probably hear in any kind of rehab situation. So yeah, buckle up. This one's a beauty.
So I got a really good and practical case study of a challenge and taken a few risks over the years, and this would be right up there. In fact, it would be the greatest one. Seth O'Donnell wins a national title in March, and then a week and a half later has left-sided glute sacral pain. So he has a sacral stress reaction, MRI, but he's severely limited in his function, as in very, very sore, struggling to get in and out of the car, daily activities, very challenging for him. MR didn't match his symptoms. So we played around with a few different things for 3 or 4 weeks. We did a very small amount of Ultra-G running, which he could actually tolerate, but he was very sore. So we did very small amounts of loading 2 to 3 times a week. We then re-MR'd him 5 weeks later, which showed a significant stress fracture on the left side, sacrum. The challenge was he hadn't qualified for the world titles in September, and so we then had to make a decision. What were we going to do? Were we going to try for it? Were we not? He couldn't run a step at this stage without pain. So we got a group of us together. We got Dave Beakley, physio. We got Aaron Callett, great strength and conditioning, high performance guy, and Michael McDeesey together. And we came up with a plan. And so the plan was based on two things. One, what's the minimum amount of running we can do for this bone? So bone health was number one. And then number two, physiology wise, how can we maintain the gains where he's at without deconditioning and then recondition him back to high loads? So our performance training block had to start the next week for him to be ready in our minds for the world titles, all right, when he had this MRI. So what we did is we decided to run every second day to allow bone healing, or the bone to be able to respond to the load. So we ran every 48 hours. But we ran fast. So we didn't do any slow running. So we started at 40 Ks a week, and we did a VO2 session. Then we did a threshold session. We did a VO2 session. We did a threshold session, and then another high intensity track session. And we just rotated through those four over 8 days. He looked normal running. He had significant pain while he was running, and he would pull up with varying degrees of soreness, but he looked normal running. The first session that we did was 10-200s fast, because he handled that better than slow. So we decided that the bone doesn't like slow plodding, spending lots of time on ground. So we ran every second day. And so we then re-MR'd him at 10 weeks. Looked a lot better. He has run every day with pain. At that period of time, he still wasn't pain-free. MR looked a lot better. He then goes to Europe and runs. He runs a 3:37 for 1500, 6 weeks after that second MRI that he had. 10 weeks after it, he ran 7:34 for 3000, which is the third fastest ever by an Australian. Wow. So we started the performance block week 5. He ran every second day until week 11 of that block, which was, so up until 12 weeks after his sacral stress, for the first 12 weeks, he ran every second day. And that was the week that he ran 3:37. He was still running every second day. He ran 3:37 for 1500. So
amazing.
He was doing 30 Ks of threshold work a week. So we started with single thresholds, and then we got to the point where we did some double thresholds on the one day. Again, no warm up, just went straight for physiology. And then we bounced. So his lactate tolerance was really high at nationals when he ran really well. He could run a 255 kilometer pace and at 1.5 millimole. He could also do 8 400s in 55 seconds and be 21 millimole.
Awesome.
Which is an extraordinary range to have. Most athletes can't do that. And so what's crazy is then by sort of week 14, 15, his pain started to decrease, and then his pain went away. We averaged 67 days a week. I want to get this right. His first 7 weeks, he averaged 67 Ks a week of his performance block. Then the second 8 weeks, he averaged 128 Ks a week.
Wow.
So he ended up getting back to 160 Ks a week. But he didn't, 4 weeks out from world titles, he hadn't run more than 120 Ks a week in 6 months.
Yeah, wow.
And so in the end, so he did particularly well to get there and qualify. In the end, that's what held him back, though, is he's probably run half the distance that the guys he was running against in that period of time. But what he would have done is he would have done like a significant proportion of what they did around threshold work, VO2 work, and what we sort of call zone 6, lactate tolerance work. We were doing, very high volumes of that work. And, as I said, he was doing... And then when he got up to around, 70, 90 Ks a week, he was doing 70% of that running at faster than 3-minute K pace.
Yeah. Meanwhile, with a raging stress fracture in his sacrum.
What he didn't do is he didn't run further than 46 minutes in one run. So his longest run for 4 months was 46 minutes in a single run. So so I think it was a really smart play by, Mickey and Dave and AK, and to say, all right, well, this is what gives us a chance. And then my role is to say, well, how do I maximize physiology within those limitations? And it was amazing what he was able to absorb and what he did. What we also did early on, which I think helped a lot, he did a shitload of cross training. Started on the bike, then he didn't love the bike. We went to elliptical. So when I say a shitload, I mean 2 hours a day. And he was also doing a lot of sauna. He did up to 90 minutes a day of sauna.
Yeah, wow.
For the aerobic adaptations. And they are crazy, so just say his resting heart rate during the day is maybe 60. He was in there and doing low level movements and his heart rate would have been 120. So, you can see the aerobic adaptations, especially as we were going, well, we're trying to decondition as least amount as possible and then recondition as quickly as possible. So that's why early days we went really hard with heat and we went really hard with cross training. And then as soon as we possibly could, we ran fast.
What a story. And it didn't play through the audio there, but that stress fracture healed. That through all that training, when they re-MRI'd it at about the 4-month mark or somewhere between 4 and 6 months from memory, that stress fracture had healed despite all that loading, all that training. It's a story that I just couldn't, unless I heard it, which you all just did then, I wouldn't have believed it. So an unreal story of risks versus rewards and listening to the story in front of you and the person in front of you and their goals and wishes, but also to putting a magnificent team around you too. Like Jack talked about Dave Beakley, Andrew Kellett. Both those guys work at high level roles within Australian cricket, so they know bone. They know bone very, very well. They know bone stress very well and how to work with it. And obviously Michael Medisky as well, like one of Australia's best sports doctors, if not one of the best sport doctors in the world. So an unreal team of A-listers there to coordinate a plan that just paid off. So yeah, wonderful story and a really high risk story that broke all the rules that paid off for Seth and his team.
Yeah, I had 3 key takeaways that I just wanted to share, and that was one of them, is just having a great team around you. Like it's so important just to get people who have understood, know know the injury, know how to deal with it, and know how to push the envelope a little bit in that situation as well. So Seth definitely had that around him. I suppose the second thing is that if people heard that, and I think that it's just one of those things that you just push through. And if I'm sore, if I've got a stress fracture or a muscle problem or a tendinopathy or whatever, I know that I can push through because Seth did it. That's not the message. That's not the message to take out of this. It's like and this leads me to the third point for me, and that is that you learn a little bit via trial, error and experience to work around the injury. So that's what they did with the sauna, the cross training, the high tempo threshold VO2 max running to decrease the amount of steps that he was taking through those bony structures each week. Terrific management. Yeah. So I'm so pleased that you got Jack on, Mick, and they could share that. I know this episode has gone longer, and to be honest, mate, like when I knew that you and Jack were going to get together to talk about this stuff, I was hopeful that it would come in under 2 hours. So well done for getting it at least under an hour. But hopefully people got something out of this chat, because even I have. Like, I thought it was terrific. So thank you.
Yeah, no, pleasure. It was great. Yeah, remarkable. And look, anyone that wants to, Andrew's got a great. He and his wife Lee, both high performing, high achieving people. I've got a wonderful website, so if you just Google Andrew Russell, you'll find him and his website, and you can read more about him there. But wonderful human being, and great podcast. I was just grateful to have an opportunity to talk shop with him. So that's me done for today. I better wrap things up before our time clips over an hour. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. A big thanks to our sponsors Premax, high performance skincare for high performance people, and Learn.Physio, world class education for health professionals. We'll catch you next week.